Hi everybody, it's Jackie Smurden here at Dunnock Studio in the heart of Norfolk, and this is all about art with a heart. So I'm here to help you on your art journey and help you get the best out of everything you want to do with your art. So today, brushes, watercolour, what do you need? What have you got? What could you get? And well, how much could you spend? Because some of them are very, very expensive. So today's little video is about some of these and what you might need and what you definitely might not need, including little wonderful things like this. So let's get into it. Okay, let's get started with some brushes and see what we can find out about them. So I'm going to do some swatching at the same time because I like to swatch out some colours every now and again. So I've got some Saunders Waterford white knot paper here, cold pressed or not hot pressed, for those of you who might or might not remember that. I've got a little video about the papers elsewhere on my channel, which I'll pop a link in for you. So I'm just going to start by swatching out some colours. So I'm going to pick up my first brush, which is a pointed round. Doesn't look very pointed, does it? So what does a round mean? It just means it's a round in that shape. Usually has a bit of a belly on it, but not too much. As soon as you make it wet, you get that pointed effect straight away. So I'm going to pick up some cerulean blue and pop some on here. And so first of all, just make a mark just so you can see the colour. And once that's on, leave that well alone. So this is like sort of coffee consistency at the moment. And then we're going to have a little look, what sort of shapes could you make with a round brush? Well, you could start off with a fine line, or relatively fine, then you could put more pressure on, and then you could lift off. So you've got like almost like a sort of a leaf or a boat. You could do sort of patterns using that. You can use the point for quite delicate work. You can use the point for a line. You could spot with it. I think you get the idea. A watercolour round brush is quite versatile. This one is from the SAA, now Cass Art, Matthew Palmer's Super Point brush. I don't know if they still do them, but it's basically a round watercolour brush that has a point on it. So rounds can come in different sizes. So this is the Matthew Palmer's medium. First one was small, and this one is a Rosemary Co round, which is a size 16, but you may have heard me say before, please don't worry about the sizes. It's very, very difficult because each manufacturer does a different sizing system, and even within one manufacturer, the different ranges of brushes they use can actually be different sizes. So whatever you do, don't get hung up on the sizes, which is why it's always good to either go and see them in person or get a catalogue with them life size, which Rosemary Co do. Although they're not the most inexpensive brushes in the world, they definitely try and help you with a free catalogue, so that's always worth sending off for. So here's the larger one, which is exactly the same as we used before. So I'm just going to pick up some more of that, and see, this is a much bigger brush, so I could do a much bigger shape. Oop, I've lost my colour there. There we go, let's just get some more colour. So let's pop that into there. Got a dual shape there, but because of that point I can still do dots, on there. I can still press down lightly, press heavily, just get a bigger shape, like so. Can still do tiny little marks. Can really go quite delicate with it. So it's a really big brush, but you can see what I mean. So that's a round brush. So now I'm going to move on to a mop brush. So here's a large mop. You can really see why it's called a mop, can't you? It's rounded at the tip, it's got a big belly, which is the word we use for the middle of the brush there. This one's from Jackson's. It's a Raven range, and you can get different sizes. Here is a much smaller version of the same brush. So if I use this one on here, I could do a big wash across here. But obviously it's a very big brush for a very small piece of paper, so let's pop that back. Here's a Rosemary Co version, sort of in between the two sizes, but as I say, they're all going to be different sizes, so don't worry about that. So again, let's pick up the next colour which I've got on here, which is a cobalt turquoise light. It's a Winsor and Newton one. So let's do a little run out of space here. I'm going to pop him up the top. It's the other way around to what I've written them, but it doesn't matter. And we can also do the same as we did with the round brush. The mop does very similar. Look at that point, and you can do pushing down shapes, but also because it's called a mop, you can do some nice washy shapes sideways. You can even manage a dry brush technique, which I'm just about getting there. You can see where the paint is broken up a little bit because I'm dragging it sideways, and as I go the paint dries out. So that's a mop. They're really good for putting big washes on across your whole piece of paper or great areas of it. So mops are nice, very similar to rounds in the sense you can bring them to a fine point despite their size. So then the next one we're going to go to is French ultramarine. So we're going to now try a rigger, which you've probably heard of, sometimes called riggers, sometimes called fine liners or liners. Now everybody will have a reason why they call them different names, and every manufacturer will have a reason. My idea is not to tell you this is exactly what they'll all be called. It just so happens to be what this one's got written on here, and which is the one that I would call a rigger. It's quite a long narrow brush. See how fluffy it is? I'll put some water on it. Ta-da! So it's very easy to get these brushes into a point as long as you haven't ruined them by leaving them upside down in water, which I have done on occasion. So let's pick up some ultramarine blue from my selection here. So what would you do with a rigger? Well, clues in the name. So you might draw some very fine lines, and you might be alluding to the fact that they're on a boat, on some rigging. Now I can also hold it quite close to the ferrule and even use it to draw a little picture, which is, that's just one way of using it. So there you go, you can draw very fine lines. It's also really good to draw with it very long, so have it right at the top and then let it wiggle. I've got wobbly hands, so it's easy for me to do this wiggle, and you can draw some quite convincing tree branches if you let the brush do whatever it wants. And that's quite freeing if you find yourself always very carefully painting a tree trunk and then filling in the branches. You can just try and loosen yourself up a bit and let the brush go for a walk. So riggers are really good for boat rigging and for all sorts of foliage and just random dots and dashes. So rigger, always useful to have. Don't normally cost an awful lot of money. That one is a Winsor and Newton professional. It's got a nice shape, that one. So far all of these brushes you've seen have been synthetic. So from a rigger, in between a rigger and a round or a mop is the sort of extended round, which has got a slightly longer point. Now this one's an old SAA version. It's called a worker, so it's a bit of a workhorse, literally. So when you're using a worker, it's just really an extension of the point on the round to be slightly more finer. But again, this is their name for it. It could be called something completely different, extended point, all sorts of different things. This one is quite hard. It's just come out of its cap. So when you take these caps off, you don't put them back on the brush. They're just to protect it in the shop. Give that funny old brush that's very firm a wish in water, wish in water, and then you'll get a lovely soft brush. It's just washing out the gum arabic that's holding the brush together. So let's have a look at a slightly different colour. So let's make some paint here. So this one is a very interesting blue called Prussian blue. Some of these you'll already heard of, some of them you might not. So let's pop that one in. I didn't swatch out my ultramarine. See, I'm not doing my job properly, am I? So Prussian blue, look at the depth and dark on that. So if you want to see the colour a little bit more, just pull out with a damp brush and let the colour go for a walk. It doesn't want to move, just tease it a little bit. So I'm working this paint using a worker brush. That's just a user-friendly brush that can do all sorts of things. Again, you could use this for just random shapes. See what shapes each brush makes. Everybody's brush is going to be different. I can't tell you what brush shape you're going to get until you have a go yourself. So you will find that if you've got some brushes, you need to get them out and do this yourself. See what you can get them to do. So this one isn't quite as easy to turn into a petally leaf shape because there's not as much of a belly on it. As you can see, it's much straighter here, but it's equally very good at dots. It's also quite good at the wiggly line, giving a relatively good random effect as the rigger did. So you can see it does all sorts of things. By the way, if you're doing a tree and you want to make it look natural, when you've done the tree, run a damp brush underneath it, and there you go, instant roots on your tree. So now we've got another colour, and let's see which one I could use for this one. So this one is known as a filbert. This particular one is a Rosemary Co, and it's a filbert, but it's also known as a cat's tongue, which you can probably see why. And I think most people probably buy it because of the name. So other filberts, such as you use for oils and acrylics, tend to be a little bit more rounded than this one. So this is quite an interesting brush. For this one we're going to use indigo, which is, as the name suggests, very dark. Let's see what this looks like. So if I'm going to try and do a similar shape to the other three, I need to just work it slightly differently because this brush is in an angle. And then I can just pull it out with some water, see if I can get that colour to come with me. Go for a walk. There you go, nice indigo. Very similar to Prussian blue in that it's very cool blue and very dark. So what sort of shapes could we do with that? Well, let's have a little look. So there's the obvious thing that you can do is make a shape Oh, it's quite interesting. Looks like a fish. Oh, look at that. Just made myself an aquarium just by swatching. Obviously it needs a little bit more work. But there you go. They almost look like angel fish. So this brush could be used to do all sorts of soft roundish marks like this. That looks like a lily pad. But again, it's got a point here, but it's a flat point. So if I was going to try and go into this corner here, I could use that point like that to be pretty accurate. Meanwhile, trying to keep the paint flowing across so that I filled that space without using a tiny rigger brush. I don't quite know what that would be. Looks like a, oh, I don't know, Scottish thistle. There you go, that'll do. While you're doing something like this, if you pick up a little bit more paint than you had before and make it slightly thicker, so less water, drop it back into the one you've just made, you can get some lovely effects whilst the paint is still damp, because it will spread. So there you go, little tip there, let that one keep going. Okay, so we'll just pause for a moment and have a little look at a couple more brushes. So here's another brush. This is a short flat brush, and it's short as in the length of the bristles is short. Sometimes the handles can be short to go with that, so they're a bit more transportable. So flat is really good, even if you're just going to use it for water. So are the mops. You can cover your paper with a nice wash of water if you want to do some wet in wet techniques. So let's pick up some paint we've previously used. Let's go with this one, the indigo, and then I can just drop that in and do a big sweeping wash. Now I've added water first so you can see how much paler that is. So you need to be a bit more generous with your paint, and it's also a big brush. So let's pop another one on, that's better. But it's got an interesting shape the way it's done that, hasn't it? So again, you could pick up some thicker paint on that brush and start dropping it in. There we go, let's have a tree line here. I'll put in a bit more in one place. There we go, something like that. There you go, you've got a little mini landscape just popped up there. Excuse the noise in the background if you can hear it. It's our local farmers. Very, very busy out there, so we don't mind at all. So there we go. So that's a short flat, any sort of flat brush. Obviously the name gives it away really. So what else could you possibly do with a flat brush? Well, you could use it like this. Very nice, quite reasonably straight line if you like straight lines. You could do almost calligraphy with it. I used to do calligraphy. That'd be really good for a row of beach huts, wouldn't it? The roofs of the beach huts. So again, all sorts of different marks you could make with that, just to give you an idea. Obviously the smaller the flat, the smaller your marks would be. So that's quite a nice one. And then on a similar theme but slightly different, we have this one, which you can see is like the last one, slightly smaller. This is an angled brush, sometimes called an angle shader. Same principle. Let's have a little look. Slightly different colour. Oops. Slightly made my paint too thick here. Whoopsie. There we go. Okay, so what could I do with an angle shader? Well, here's an idea. I could go into an angle with it and try and follow the shape, obviously, of a fairly straight edge there. So if I was going to try and fill in all of that and make a pattern random or otherwise. You could try and join all those together. Highly recommend you do this playing. You're not trying to do a picture, you're just playing. Now I'm going to extend these down using the flat brush technique really. So they're beginning to look like they could be, at this point of course you could switch brushes to whichever one you think is best for the job. There you go. Let's see what happens if I give that a little bed to lie on. These ones are already dry over here. There you go. It's just a pattern, but all of that was done with the angle shader. Of course you could do exactly what we did on the other one, do a line, but you could do the line wiggly and wide, narrow and wiggly and wide. Just put more pressure, less pressure. It looks like a ribbon. There we go. So that's known as an angle shader. Very good for lifting out flower stems, branches, etc. So now we have two that are quite similar. We have a dagger and a sword liner. Now this dagger is made from some sort of animal hair, which I don't generally have in my collection. And this one is another Rosemary Co one, which is synthetic. So let's have a look at the dagger. They do look very similar, don't they? So a dagger, although this is slightly bigger, technically it's because this one is small. The dagger, by its very nature, is a shorter implement than a sword. But as I say, this is a different brand, so they're going to be different. So this is why it's not worth getting hung up on it. Basically the shape's the same, but you see how fluffy this one is. So if I pop it into water, look at the difference. So suddenly you've got something very interesting here. So obviously going to have to make sure I've got some paint for this. So I'm just going to go back to my, let's go back to that SAA worker, that nice sort of tough brush that seems to do everything, and mix up a nice bit of paint here so I can pick this up. And this is where you've got to sometimes be more generous with your paint, which is something I don't always think that I'm very good at. So I've popped all of some paint in here. So for a dagger, let's just see, I think this is more of a sword liner, so we're just going to go, look at that point. I mean, that is tiny, look at it. And you can go make some shapes, but the trick is when you put pressure on, you get this beautiful broken line. So let's try that with the darker paint so you can see it a little bit better. So very light, not quite enough paint on there, Jackie. Let's try that again. Now I'm on rough paper, and that's quite hard to get that to leave the brush, which is absolutely fine. So we'll have one more go. See if I can get that any better. This brush is obviously a natural hair, and it's taking up an awful lot more water, which is why people do tend to prefer natural hair if they are a high level artist. It's entirely a personal preference. So you get that broken line. Yes, I did forget to tell you this is rough paper, whereas the last one was cold pressed paper. So there you go, you get the idea. So they're very random marks, but you can get an absolutely tiny line on there, which is really quite very, very small. It's almost like two or three hairs at the most on the end there. So then last one we've got is this sword liner, and this one definitely says sword on it, so I haven't got them muddled up, but I'm pretty sure they're very similar shapes, just one's shorter and one's longer. So the sword liner, you could do similar to what we did there, broken lines, or you could do again this straight line and then up and then down. So this is more synthetic, it doesn't quite hold as much water, which is why it's easier for me to load it. As I said to you at the beginning, if you get your brushes out, it does help, because you'll then know what they can do and not do. Just a little overlap there and a little bit of a flick and you get a dry brush as well. So let's try that there, nice dry brush. So sword liners and daggers, very, very nice brushes. There's one more to show you, which I don't generally use. This is a very old fan brush. Can see why it's called a fan. So a fan brush could be used most often when people are doing foliage. So if I get that nice and wet, this is a Winsor and Newton Cottonman, so it's old, so you can see as I've got it wet it's gone into a very scraggy looking brush. However, that might be just what we need if we're trying to do stubby trees or brushes or shrubs in a painting. Literally, the thing I would say about these is if you're going to use a brush like this, keep moving it around, don't keep it in the same position, otherwise it's so obviously a fan brush. It stands out a mile that somebody's gone over their whole painting very carefully like this. You can obviously drag with it as well and create lines, etc. It's not something I use very often. It's one of the technique brushes. You will see people sell brushes that are especially for texture, foliage, grass, all sorts of things. Some of them are like the flat we had here, but they have pieces cut into them, so you get gaps in there. Well, for me, I just get an old flat brush and chop bits out with scissors. You don't have to buy a specialist brush, but of course if you want to, that's absolutely fine. For the fan brush technique, I would generally get myself a round and I would splay it like that, and then I would get exactly the same effect with my paint as if I'd used this flat brush. Can you see? It's exactly the same, but I probably wouldn't do that to my best brush. I'd do that to a round that was sort of been similar through years of painting, so it wouldn't be such a problem. So there we go, we have some different ideas for you there. Now, as I said to you before, with the size issue that all brushes are not made the same, you might want to just try and have a look in your local art shop to get the brush that you think is feeling good for you. And if you can't get to an art shop, you haven't got an art shop, Rosemary Co, they will send you a free catalogue. And I'm not endorsing them in any way, shape or form, but I just happen to have their catalogue. So the thing that they're really good at, apart from the fact that they're selling extremely nice brushes, is that all of these pictures I'm showing you are life size. So here's the mops we were looking at earlier. And that's a squirrel one. Here's the red dot collection that I've got some of as well, and there's the cat's tongues. But if you wanted to have a sort of imagine a brush in your hand, these are going to give you an idea of what sort of size each brush is. So if nothing else, you could order their brush catalogue, which is sent to you free. And that way you can have a look at different sizes. But even within this book, this catalogue, that range will have a size 8 on it, and over here a size 8 would be a completely different size. So do not get hung up on the numbers, please. If somebody says to you on a demo, you need this brush on this size, etc., it's fine if you buy exactly the brush that they're saying, but that might not suit you. You might like to have a learner at the moment who likes to do, when they're not with me, they like to do miniatures, so they'd probably be quite happy with a tiny rigger and a mini mop, whereas other people like to do wet in wet, and they'd be happy with a couple of big mops, which also go to a point, and maybe some random marks with these sword and daggers, etc. So if I was telling you which one brush would get you through everything, it's a really good question, because what I think is good for me might not work for you, and everybody's got their version. However, I would be tempted to go for something like a round brush, which is very similar to a mop but not quite as big in the belly. So here's another round brush, slightly bigger than this one. So when you put the water on them, they will go into relatively good point for their size and make it so that you can do most things with one brush. The mops are the same, they come to a point. As soon as you go down the route of flats, etc., there's only so much you can do with that, but you can't really do the detail you could get with a tiny rigger. So it's up to you. If you've got some brushes and they are very stiff and they look like they're hog hair, which you'll know what I mean, they're sort of pale ivory colour and they're very stiff and scratchy, they're not going to be very good for watercolour. So try and buy a watercolour brush with a known brand on it that you know is a brand for watercolour. Some of them on Amazon are very, very cheap, and some of them would be fine for what you want to do. So I can't tell you that they're not going to be good for you, but if you want to treat yourself to a nice brush and just give it a try, then I recommend you find a branded version. These are just a few, obviously there's hundreds out there. So if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments and I'll try and answer them. Right, so I hope that's helped you to make your own mind up about what sort of brushes you might like to try, or if the ones you've got are enough, or whether you need to perhaps have a little look and see what else is out there. For me, I never spend a huge amount of money on brushes. I like to be able to use my brushes and not worry about the fact that I'm going to ruin them because they're so much money. So it's entirely up to you. However, if you buy a nice branded watercolour brush, you'll get a much nicer experience than if you buy something really, really low quality, which you won't know what's in it, you won't know how it's supposed to even work, because it will just be branded for everything, probably watercolour oils, the whole lot. If that says that on the pack, it generally means avoid. Watercolour brushes by their very nature need to carry water, so they're very, very different to other brushes. So good luck. If you've got any questions, please ask in the comments, and don't forget, it's your choice. You might have a lovely brush that you bought for very little money and it works for you. That's great. So do not ever be swayed by somebody telling you it's not good enough. Make sure you use your brushes, that's the important thing. So bye for now and happy painting. See you soon.